And to discuss these developments and more, I'm joined by my colleagues, our correspondents in the two capitals that are shaping this conflict. We have Nick Harper with us from Washington, D.C. and Julia Chapman with us from Moscow. Good evening to both of you. Julia, let's start with you. What can you tell us about the Russian troop advancement? Moscow claims it has captured the port city of Kherson.
Yes, Moscow is saying that they have captured Kherson. They say paratroopers have arrived in Kharkiv. But according to Ukrainian officials, both of those cities remain under Ukrainian control. They have denied that Russia has made any kind of significant inroads in either of those major metropolises. Undoubtedly, Russia is seeing more progress on the southern coast of the Black Sea in southern Ukraine, where they have been joining troops from annexed Crimea with those in the Donbas region, the separatists that have been fighting there for the past 8 years now. They have allegedly, according to state media here in Russia and the Ministry of Defense, joined up somewhere in between and claimed that they have control over most of Ukraine's southern coast at the moment. But Ukraine insists that that is not yet the case, although there has certainly been some progress from the Russians in the south, but much less so than was expected by many military analysts at the beginning of this conflict.
Nick, the United States has warned of a second wave of Russian attacks. American officials are now saying that the worst is yet to come from Kiev. Tell us about the current threat perception in Washington, D.C.
Absolutely. I mean, that is the big worry, that we haven't seen the worst of it. US military intelligence pointing to this huge line of trucks, this military convoy stretching some 40 miles, heading towards the Ukrainian capital from Belarus. The big fear is that if all of them get over the border and head towards the capital city, there will be significant damage, but also potentially significant loss of life, because there are many civilians still in the capital city and in other major cities across Ukraine. The US saying that Russia is targeting places that are populated by civilians, not just going after military targets. There is this real concern that we haven't seen the worst of the fighting yet, and the Pentagon warning that President Putin still has considerable firepower at his disposal, firepower that he hasn't yet chosen to use.
There are also reports, Nick, of Moscow planning to proclaim Viktor Yanukovych as Ukraine's next president. The president of the US delivered his State of the Union address today. He announced a host of new sanctions against Russia. Is there any indication that if the Russian escalation goes beyond Ukraine, the West may move beyond sanctions?
Well, there certainly is. I mean, that has been the line of the United States up until now, that if this conflict moves outside of Ukraine, specifically if it moves into NATO territory, the US and NATO will defend every inch of that NATO territory. That is what the US president has been telling us so far. So if it were to spill into a country like Poland, NATO would be ready to respond. But the United States is also saying that it is ready to respond with more sanctions. In the State of the Union speech, President Biden announced the banning of Russian aircraft over US airspace. It also means that Russian airliners cannot land or take off from US soil. Canada's already done that. The European Union has already done that as well. But the White House signalling off the back of the State of the Union speech that they are still prepared to go after the Russian oil and gas sector. It's something that they've held back on so far. The fear is that if they were to do so, it would only worsen the supply chain problems we're already seeing with the delivery of oil and gas, and that in turn would push up prices and hurt American voters here in the United States. So they've held back on that so far. But it is something that the White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki says is still on the table, something that they are considering. And on top of that, considering going after more oligarchs and going after them harder, intending to seize those luxury yachts, jets, the luxury apartments, the type of assets that could run into billions of dollars if the United States and its allies are able to seize them. So there is other things that the US is considering, and we've seen plenty of action so far, but other things they say they would still be able to do to try and limit Russia and its advance.
Nick, Julia, thanks very much for joining us on this broadcast. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.